Saddle hunters, our brothers over at Tethered continue to kill the game by releasing innovative products. They just recently put out the Eberhard series saddle. They also put out the Menace saddle, which is for our Husky brothers and sisters that are into saddle hunting. That saddle will do just maybe a little bit better job of cupping your quote unquote assets. But the thing that I'm most excited about is their recent release of the Tethered One climbing stick. This thing is crazy light, crazy strong, and crazy quiet. I'm just going to cut to the chase here and give you some specs. Each stick weighs in at less than 1 pound. That includes your Dynalite rope attachment. A 3-pack of these will weigh in at 2.7 pounds, which is ridiculously light. It's a 17-inch step-to-step single stick height, and there's an 8.5-inch step footbed, which gives you plenty of room for those of us folks with bigger feet. It's all made with aerospace grade titanium and aluminum for construction. So if you'd like to learn more about Tethered's innovative products, head over to tetherednation.com and check them out. This podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. Skull Brew Coffee roasts premium single origin coffee, guaranteeing to deliver the freshest coffee directly to your doorstep. The kicker, they're 2% for conservation certified and donate 10% of their proceeds back to organizations who support the interests of our hunting community. So go to skullbrewcoffee.com and pick up one of their 3-killer roasts and fuel your hunt and fill more tags with Skull Brew Coffee. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you are listening to episode number 199. Today we're talking learning curves and hitting the reset button with my buddy Doug Rose, so stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. Hope some of you out there are filling some tags or at least having more success than me. Yesterday, I'm going to keep this up front kind of short because I'm actually going to go out and scout today. Truthfully, I've been scouting way more than I've been hunting, this season. My trail cameras, I don't rely on them exclusively, but I kind of rely on them to tell me like what places are popping and what places might have some action. And then hunt accordingly. But this year it just seems like, I've had good trail camera inventory and then things will just kind of disappear, for no rhyme or reason. I'm sure there's a rhyme or a reason to it. And the cool thing is, or maybe even it's the frustrating thing, is that a lot of these setups that I think are going to be good and are prime, I'm not getting people on them. They're in these out of the way places that I just don't think people are going to be near. So it's like, I don't think these particular spots specifically are being influenced by significant pressure. I think some of the outside areas around these spots have significant pressure. I think I mentioned on the one podcast, or maybe it was an Instagram post, there was 12 vehicles in the one pull-off spot that I was hunting when I came out one morning, after I had a morning hunt. So there's definitely pressure. But just I don't think there is necessarily in those spots that I'm specifically hunting and where in and around near where I have trail cameras, because I've just not seen human sign. I've just not seen people on the cameras. But yesterday, kind of a crappy weather day, mid 70s. Not a great wind for me for most of the setups I would have wanted to hunt. And so what my plan was I was like, I'm just going to go scout this one side of the mountain to try to find hot sign and set up on it, because there's a piece of the mountain that I've not scouted. And I was just curious what was up there. And I figured, might as well use that day, or a warm day or a less than great weather day and go try something new. And so that's what I did. Did probably close to 6 miles and just didn't even find a setup, to be honest with you. I ended up not even hunting, and I ended up not even setting up. So I basically scouted until closing time and then came back home. So the plan today is to really go out, move a few cameras around here since it's Sunday and there's no hunting, and then scout this one particular area a little more thoroughly. I scouted it this past winter, but I need to kind of make a pass through and see where they're starting to lay down sign, because one of my cameras, cell camera, has told me now I've had a few bucks start to hit a scrape on this particular piece. And so I want to go see, not just this spot I know that they're hitting, but are there other places that I'm, maybe overlooked whenever I scouted in the off season, or some of the areas where I know where I found sign, are they starting to lay down sign in those spots? So I kind of start to get a sense of, what areas are starting to heat up. That way I can start to plan my hunts accordingly. Um, just because, for me, I got, whatever it is, 3 weeks maybe to try to get something done here. Limited days to do that before I leave for my trip to the Midwest. So with that, we're going to go ahead and cut this up front short and just kind of jump into the podcast. I have a cool show today. I have my buddy Doug Rose on. Doug is, as I mentioned in the upfront of this, or at the beginning of this podcast, he's kind of a new friend. We connected over the interwebs. And he's a listener of the show, and so this is kind of like a hunting profile. And he had, an interesting kind of route into hunting, and he had some, life events. And the reason I thought the story was cool is because he had some life events and things that occurred that required him to kind of take a step back and reevaluate things and kind of hit the proverbial reset button, not just in his hunting life, but just in life in general. And hunting was a significant part of that. So I thought it was a cool story, especially this time of year when we all kind of get jazzed up and, maybe our priorities start to get out of whack a little bit. We're passionate about whitetail hunting, but, sometimes we need to kind of take a step back and think about what things are actually really, really important and remove the stress and just make sure that we're enjoying the time that we get into the timber. So with that, we'll go ahead and get this show kicked off. As always, I want to thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. Today, I am joined by a new friend. So this is a gentleman that actually, as many times I've run into folks now on social media, and as much as it can be the bane of my existence during certain times, especially as we get into election times and stuff like that, I often want to just shut it off. But the good that it's brought to my life is that I get to run into folks like the gentleman I have on the line here with me to talk deer hunting. And you end up with a friend that you're trading buck pictures with now, and texting when you see things, and texting whenever the weather's right or the moon's right or whatever, and it's because of social media that brought, bring folks together that otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to meet. And I'm joined by, as I mentioned, my new buddy, Mr. Doug Rose. How you doing, brother? How's it going?
Good, Clint. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet, man. So how are things out in your neck of the woods, man? I know we're getting ready to get cranked up for the season here. It's just I felt like just like a week or so ago we had like a little turn in the weather that started making me get a little excited, and then all of a sudden I got slapped in the face with like more heat and more humidity this week.
Yeah, the heat and the humidity has been unreal. I mean, I'm a heavy equipment operator, so I'm outside, 12, 14 hours a day, and the heat's been something else. And in the whitetail woods, the pictures have definitely showed that as well. So
yeah,
yep, I'm feeling you on that.
Yeah, for sure, man. It's like I had some cameras that were pretty active for a little while. Just went and did a card pull, and that snap of like just nasty hot weather we had, and I don't know what it was like, late mid-July almost through like mid-August. It felt like we just didn't get a break. Like it was just hot and humid every stinking day. And the cameras definitely kind of told that story. And I've been trying to pay a little bit more attention to the moon recently, and kind of had noticed that, that dark period that has kind of occurred also kind of coincided to a degree with what you would consider to be bad moon days. And I'm not an expert at it by any means. This is really kind of the first year I'm paying more and more attention to it. But that's at least what my buddies who follow the moon pretty religiously have been telling me. It's like, the moons are bad. My cameras are dead too. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I'm kind of right there with you as far as the moon goes. I mean, I've never really paid attention to it, especially prior to, the season. I haven't really, gotten into the moon phase quite early. But this year, actually having some time, fortunately, to go out in the evenings and scout, I have kind of, started to pay attention to it a little bit. And I'm with you. I think that there's definitely something to be said about that.
Yeah.
Because we've seen proof in the bean fields. That's for sure.
Yeah, and that's the thing that, I never really thought much about. And truth be told, it's like I really never had, especially growing up, there wasn't a lot of opportunity. I don't recall a lot of bean fields being around cornfields, yes, but, those are kind of hard to glass. Maybe some alfalfa fields and stuff like that. But it was more shining than it was glassing growing up with the hunting culture that I grew up in and stuff like that. So it's like, I know a lot of my buddies, like they will prioritize kind of their glassing evenings around moon days. and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah, well,
especially on the
makes
back,
sense.
yeah, especially on the backside of like a full moon, like they'll definitely be out glassing those days more so than they would be, on other days, so to speak. But with
Yeah, and
that,
even what these guys are talking about with like the red moon,
yes,
right? Like you start to hear about the red moon now,
yeah,
and that's a local guy to me here
Adam
in
Hayes, yeah,
Ohio.
yeah,
Yeah, and I mean I've had good conversations with that man, and I never really. We'll kind of get into my story, I guess, but in the process of him, buying the Moon Guide and taking over that company and really pushing that, I haven't really been, you know, in the industry, if you will. I
right,
haven't really been around it, so it's kind of new to me, and kind of heard about it through some, podcast stuff.
right.
But yeah, I think there's definitely some truth to it, and something that will help people to, find success, whether it's glassing or hunting. For
Yeah.
sure.
And I
Yeah.
mean, there's plenty of guys out there that kind of live and die by it. And those dudes I know have plenty of deer on their wall to show for. Adam being one of
Yeah.
them. He's got several 200-inch deer to his credit, and
Right.
he follows that thing to a T. I truthfully tried to follow it for probably like 2 years, I think, and I've mentioned this in the past. And I had it work out for me one time where it was like to a T, like to within the half-hour window. Like I saw movement whenever it said I was gonna see movement. But I just think in some instances, some of that, I think some of it is circumstantial in terms of where you hunt and what type of property you're hunting, and the quality of property that you're hunting, like with pressure and all those things. I think if you have, a scenario set up where you have, super low pressure and, and the habitat's right and stuff like that, I don't, what studies will tell you is that the deer don't necessarily move any more or less on certain moons. But what those collared deer studies are telling you is that they're not moving any like more significant distance, right? I think is what they're saying. But the reality is, as a deer hunter, I don't need them to move like an extra mile or 500 yards. Like I literally just need them to get up out of their bed 30 minutes before they usually would. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
it's like that's really all you're needing is that small window of opportunity. So I'm gonna pay more attention to it this year. And actually, it just seems like some of my hunts for out of state this year are actually going to time up to where I'm going to be hitting like the good moon time, like a couple days leading
Awesome.
into, and then a couple days after the full moon. So, fingers
Yeah, man.
crossed that I have some luck.
Any advantage we can get, right?
That's right, man. We need as many as we can get. but
Right.
but with that, man, I always like to kind of kick things off, man. I know you kind of mentioned, you're a heavy equipment operator. So if you wouldn't mind, for the folks out there listening, just give a little bit of background on yourself, where you're from, what you do for a living.
Yeah. Well, again, Clint, I'm super excited to be able to share my story. I'm thankful to be here. I definitely feel privileged. So thank you. I'm just an average guy from Ohio, family man. I'm actually one of four boys. So like growing up, it was always like super, ultra competitive with, every sport that the school had to offer. Also, I raced motorcycles from a young age, and, that kind of was my number one passion growing up. Dad, he would take us out hunting. I know this is a hunting podcast, but, he would take us out, rabbit hunting, squirrel hunting. We would shoot trap, but I never really deer hunted until I got back home from college. And, I'm going into my 15th year of deer hunting. And I would say my second year of mature buck hunting.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, just growing up, just constantly looking for that next adrenaline dump. I mean, really, that's kind of how I've geared everything in my life. Passion driven, working in the motorcycle industry and the power sports industry. Again, not really being a deer hunter as a kid, but really hot and heavy into motorcycles. And working in the power sports industry, I ended up finding myself at, the outdoor shows, in Ohio and other states, and, meeting some of these top tier professionals, if you will, within the hunting community.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of, I started to get some interest in it, and that kind of developed into, going on deer drives with local farmers and friends. I grew up on a small farm, and, just kind of got the bug. Right. And really what it comes down to for me, as far as when I started, was it was a way for me to satisfy my adrenaline, fix. But it was kind of hard because, when you're just driving deer with the friends and the family, that's 1 week out of the year,
Right.
So
Yeah.
come back from college and, still riding and racing and road racing and, kind of, well, I mean, as you can probably imagine, the just the nature of the sport,
injuries pile
serious
up.
injuries.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I literally, man, I had a 1-year-old. My daughter was 1 at the time, and, I'm laid up on the couch, not working, and, with my guts blown up, and, just got out of ICU, and she's, crawling over and, pulling herself up on the couch, looking at me like, what are you doing here?
Right.
And I was like, all right, I got to start finding something that, is a little safer. I mean, and I'm talking, I was looking for it. Yeah. I mean, I was flying airplanes. I was, I picked up the guitar. I thought, well, if I can get on stage and play some gigs, I'll get my, my adrenaline fix that way. And demolition derby cars, you name it, just anything I could throw myself into, that I could afford financially, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I was constantly chasing it.
Yeah.
And once again, come fall, I'd go right back into the deer hunting.
Yeah.
And it's kind of where I found it to be my thing. And I love it, more than any other hobby. It's kind of all I do now. And so that's kind of how I got started into deer hunting.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, it's not, and this is funny because I mean, you and I talked whatever it was, a month or month and a half ago or something like that when we first connected. And it's interesting because similar story for me. And I've told this on the show. It's like I was a musician, for a long time, and that was kind of what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up hunting, we deer hunted, but we didn't really bow hunt. My dad would do some, still hunting with a recurve from time to time, but he wouldn't take me on those hunts necessarily. That would be a windy day in the fall. It was more opportunity. He would get like a good weather day with like wind or rain, and because he liked to stalk, and so because we never hunted out of tree stands or anything, elevated. When I was a kid, I always ground hunted or still hunted, with a gun, and he enjoyed going out and doing that on certain days that, I guess were the best opportunities to do that type of hunting in this area. And so it was mainly, like you were saying, a lot of gun hunting. We didn't do so many drives, but it was, the normal Pennsylvania Orange Army gun hunting. It was great. Deer camp,
sure.
Had a great time. It was fun.
Oh, the camaraderie, man. It was, that's awesome.
Yeah. And so it's like I got to spend a lot of time with my uncles and stuff like that, and it was cool. And then I kind of, at a young age, I fell into music and fell in love with it. And, that became my thing, and I would still hunt and stuff like that, but it was more of like a family outing. Like you were saying, I'd go spend some time with my relatives and do that. And I spent a lot of time on stages and stuff like that. And then whenever I left music, very similar to you, it's like, I was looking for, I won't say an identity because I knew the cautionary tale of identifying yourself like as a musician as that being all that I was. And that was the thing that I was not wanting to be identified as anymore. Like I wanted to be a husband. I wanted to be a father. Like I wanted to be those things before I was anything else. And music was always the thing that identified me to most everyone that knew me. And
sure.
But I was still looking for that thing that I could lose myself in that was personal, and so when I moved back to Pennsylvania, an old buddy of my father-in-law's introduced me to bow hunting. We were doing some turkey hunting together, and we were doing some gun hunting together, and he introduced me to bow hunting, and that was it. Kind of like you, man. It was like once I found it, it was like it just I became ate up with it, and it became really personal, therapeutic in many ways. But also that adrenaline that you get on stage in front of 5,000 people. It's like, it's the only thing I've ever found that gives me that when you watch a big buck kind of rolling in on you, you know what I mean? It's the same feeling,
right.
Which is crazy. So when you got into deer hunting, man, like when you got in like full tilt bow hunting, like what was that introduction like and how did that kind of happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it kind of goes back to kind of how I'm wired. When it comes to anything I do, I kind of go, balls out. Mm-hmm. I don't really hold anything back. And a lot of people have commented saying that it's actually a fault, but, I tend to break everything down to like the molecular level, mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And just really have to get super scientific with everything I do. And it's just how I am. So I talked about, the adrenaline part. So now, with deer hunting, you can translate the adrenaline from everything else I've done to, now you can introduce the thought process, right?
Hmm.
Like the mind game, trying
Right.
to figure out, a mature deer. And then, not only that, but you introduce the competitiveness that I have of trying to be the guy that kills the biggest buck. I mean, everybody
Right.
wants to be that guy. I don't care who you are.
Right.
Um, but when I first started, my first 2 years, I was just gun hunting. That was it.
Mhm.
The third year, um, guy, I gave a guy some cash. He went to the coon dog trials, picked up a crossbow for me. So, an old used Horton crossbow. And that third year, I went out, set some stands, and I mean, just had experiences that I never knew was even possible.
Right.
Seeing deer in their natural environment, not being chased across the field. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So when I started doing that, I was like, okay, this is where it's at. Like, this is what everybody gets geeked out about. Now I know.
Right.
So it's like, okay, now I need a compound. So literally, my fourth season, I'm hunting with a compound bow, our first season ever, and a customer of mine, for quite a few years, came into me one day, and I did some work on his generator, and I worked on his motorcycles, and he's like, "Hey man," he's like, "I'm part of a club," which, I mean, that's literally what it was. I mean, he had to pay dues and everything. And he's like, we're filming our deer hunts. We're one big buck away from being the next TV show. I'm like, really? Like, okay, I'm in. Pay my dues and get going there. So I mean, literally, like the third year, or the fourth season, I'd only had 3 years under my belt and only one in the woods with a quote unquote bow. My fourth year, I'm out there filming, hunting with a compound for the first time. And, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to share this with, your audiences. It seems like, as human beings, we tend to be a product of our environment, and with social media coming on full tilt and, just constantly, everybody looking at what everybody else is doing. I really got wrapped up into the filming, and I want to be, a professional hunter, and I want to be a paid, TV star. And, that's literally the fourth year. So
Right.
when you ask about how I started bow hunting, I wanted to say that because it was a shaky start. I mean, I was a part of a group of like 15 guys, and they were pulling me all different directions. Didn't know what was going on, and I'm just trying to learn.
Mhm.
I'm like, man, I just need to learn how to deer hunt first before I deal with all this stuff. But nonetheless, my introduction to the bow hunting whitetails was a pretty crazy one.
Mhm.
I mean, here as a newbie, out there with a video camera, and I'm thankful for that. It's developed me into kind of where I'm at now, and stuff like that. But yeah, man, it was
Yeah.
pretty nuts.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, and you and I talked about this too, offline when we were connected and just kind of chatting, and the whole idea that you're a product of your environment is so true, and it's easy to get wrapped up into things, and I've even talked about it with this show, and I've talked about it, somewhat at length with my buddy Chad and stuff like that, because there was a time, when I was maybe first starting this or whatever, and um, had a sense of like pressure that I needed to do certain things or accomplish certain things or
Right,
to legitimize
right.
myself or whatever. Um, and it was really hurtful, to be honest. And to be truthful, it was one of the biggest things that probably stunted my growth, like stunted my learning curve, right? Because
Yeah,
I was more, I was thinking about, and it didn't affect my hunts as far as like, um, how I would try to like, break things down or whatever. Um, I think it hurt me in the sense that when I was in the woods on a hunt, I wouldn't be focused. I think
sure.
is what it came down to. Um,
Hmm.
because as soon as I had like a moment where I was chasing this one particular deer and like he gave me the slip and I was getting mad and I was trying to film it and it was back home on our family farm and that was when I kind of just threw my hands in the air and was like, you know what? I'm tired. Like I'm either going to stop doing the podcast, or I'm going to stop like putting pressure on myself to do something that I think other people are expecting me to do, and I'm just going to
Right.
hunt for me, and I'm going to kill what I want to kill, and I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. And that was really when I decided like that I was pretty much only going to exclusively hunt public land at that point, because I was like,
Right.
I was tired of driving 3 hours because I had a better opportunity to kind of pattern those deer. And the
Mhm.
travel was just driving me crazy. And like, I'm a normal dude with a normal job and a family and stuff like that. And it's like, you tack 3 hours of driving each way onto to get to a property, to do it consistently is just, it's hard, And so
Right.
I just decided I was going to start hunting around my house, and I was going to shoot whatever deer that these lands were going to provide me. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't going to
Right.
look for, if I wasn't going to look for things that weren't available. So it's, so that was kind of like the moral of my story. And as soon as I did that, like, man, like the learning curve, like accelerated, because I was now being focused when I was in the woods, and I was paying attention to the small details, and I was clearly just hunting for me now, and nothing and nobody else, and I think everybody kind of goes through that ends up like doing some type of media thing to a degree. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
all the buddies that I've talked to, like even I had my buddy, Kurt on from Working Class Bow Hunter, and we talked about it a little bit. And he talked a little bit about his evolution from when he first started and like thought he had to be a certain way, and then realized, "No, screw this, man, I'm going to be me." And people are
Yeah.
either going
Just
to
be
like,
yourself.
yeah,
Yeah.
people are either going to like it or they're not going to like it. But I'm going to like myself,
Right.
and that always and like you can go to music, you can go to like professional athletes. Like it's as soon as you find that value in who you are, man, the sky's the limit at that point. You know what I mean? Like it's just
Right.
like your trajectory just kind of takes off at that point. So when you talk about that product of your environment, man, like, what was that experience like? Like, cause I know you and I, when we talked offline, it was, you had a pretty big change in life in general that kind of occurred almost
Oh yeah.
simultaneously, so like talk a little bit about that, I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, basically, when this all kind of started for me, my fourth year in, I had I'd killed two bucks that I guess would be, I mean, just awesome to me, but mediocre to some, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really like to talk about numbers,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd say they would barely be the lowest of a buck deer.
Right.
But so here I am, my fourth year in. Things are actually progressing with the video production side of things. Things are kind of shaping up, and I mean, things are really just starting to snowball, and I'm starting to rub elbows. Well, I ended up branching away from that original club that I was talking about, and one of my really good friends and I, we kind of went off on our own, and things were really starting to snowball. And then pretty much as life would have it, right as things were really getting serious to the point where we could make a run at something. Yeah, I mean, that's when life hit. And, I know a lot of people can relate to that, and it's just kind of how it worked out for me. And, I went through a really nasty divorce. I met my soulmate, pretty much simultaneously, that I ended up marrying. And Kate is my world. I love her to death. I had a complete career change. I went from the power sports industry to being, a CDL, truck driver, and then into heavy equipment. I started my own business at the same time, which flopped. I mean, pretty much sky's the limit. I mean, it was just everything all at once. I mean, I literally went through, that next 3 years. I mean, it was rough.
Mm-hmm.
It was rough. I mean, I was selling all my hunting equipment, my cameras, my bows, my guns, all my guitars. I mean, I was selling everything I had just to put hot dogs in the fridge.
Mm-hmm.
And that's no joke.
Yeah.
I mean, it was nuts.
Mm-hmm.
But in that time, it literally forced me to hit the reset button. I mean, I literally couldn't afford the outdoor channel,
Mm-hmm.
so I couldn't even watch the hunting shows and what was going on, in that 3-year time frame. I mean, social media to me was just, it was brutal.
Mm-hmm.
So I completely shut down all of my social media. I had no outside influence on the hunting industry. And obviously I was focused on family. I was focused on my career. and my new relationship, and it was nuts. And it literally forced me to tune out all of the garbage. And when I finally got the opportunity, and I say 2 years ago, to actually get back into the tree. I'm not a saddle hunter yet, so I can't say back in the saddle. I'm thinking about it really hard.
We'll get you
really
there.
Hard.
We'll get you there.
But I finally got back into it, and again, being a heavy equipment operator, man, I spend like 12, 14-hour days in the machine by myself. The radio was getting old. I was tired of listening to the same classic rock and country music songs, and I was like, my brother-in-law's talked about podcasts. I really want to see what this stuff's all about. I flipped on YouTube and just started consuming content. I mean, that's and in doing that, I was trying to learn, kind of what people are talking about now, and trying to pick apart and dissect certain hunting situations I've been in, and properties that I have, properties that I've had, and just trying to figure out, more of the methodical approach to how I'm going to address, deer hunting.
Right.
So that's kind of what got me started with the podcast thing, got me back into, I guess, social media.
Right. So how do you think, like, all those changes? I mean, I think that, what you went through, like, aside from like the filming stuff and things like that, I think is, what you went through is very relatable because, life happens to people and it kind of knocks them down or whatever. And you can take that analogy to deer hunting, right? It's like you could be hunting and you could be having some success, and then all of a sudden the well could dry up for whatever reason, right? Or you could be on a hunt and you're struggling or whatever. And it's that knock down, and you have to find something like within you that's worth kind of going and going after, or getting after it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which is what you kind of did in many ways, right? It was like a wholesale reset of finding your why to a degree, right?
Right.
And
it was a reset of everything.
Yeah. It's, how do you think, on the hunting side of things, how do you think that kind of like stark reality changed your approach and mentality to hunting? Like, I guess 2-part question. Like, did it change your approach and mentality? And
it's huge, man.
And did it become more important to you at the same time?
Absolutely. When I told you when I started off, it was all about that next adrenaline rush.
Mm-hmm.
I was just out there, hey, I'm going to be able to feed my family. I'm going to be able to have a great time. And when that deer's coming in, I'm going to be shaking like a leaf. I'm going to feel like I was, not just 20 feet up, jumping 130 feet, and that is why I started. Well, it's completely different now.
Right.
And it is really hard to explain, but the reason why I brought up the environment that I put myself in, I definitely put myself in the environment to be amongst, these other guys, and in my approach to hunting. I mean, my 4th year, I bought my first mobile set.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of money. I had the newest, latest, and greatest mobile set, and those guys are telling me, dude, you can't do that. You can't go in there and hunt. You can't do this. You can't do that. You're not going to ever kill a big buck. You have tons of big bucks on your farms. We've seen the pictures, but you're not going to kill them unless you're hunting over a corn pile.
Right.
And it's like, okay, so like I immediately adopted. I got away from what I had started to,
your natural inclination, right? Your natural inclination is like, I'm going to go find deer and hunt them. And these guys who you're looking at going, they've been doing this longer than me, and they're telling me, hey, go sit on this corn pile.
They kill big bucks.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why I say it is huge. And getting away from that environment and that outside influence on what everybody thinks is the way to kill a deer, mm-hmm. a big mature buck, to literally going down to the brass tacks, the bones, and okay, how do I want to approach this? And YouTube does auto play certain videos, and mm-hmm. I started hearing this Clint Campbell guy, and I'm like, all right, he sounds like a pretty cool guy. And I look at it and
Oh,
it's
he's
like
the
the truth
coolest,
from the
man.
stand. Truth
Just,
from the stand. Like, okay, well, I'm going to listen to this because I want to see if this guy is actually going to tell the truth. And lo and behold, I mean, pretty much every single situation. I'm not a Western guy, so I can't really relate to the Western hunting. But pretty much every whitetail situation with the guests that you have had on your show, I could immediately relate to. Immediately.
Yep.
And in doing that, I'm like, okay, like it's time to completely reset. I have nothing against corn pile hunting.
Yeah.
But that's not the way I want to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I do have certain properties that I feel that if I do not bait, that we have no chance because everyone around there does, you know? So, but being the corn pile killer is not who I wanted to be. So, you know, in my crazy, you know, 3-year reset, it was about trying to figure out why I'm seeing giants, world-class deer, but I'm never able to seal the deal. You know, at this point, you know, this is 2 years ago. You know, I have 3 deer on my wall, and I have passed probably 3 times that amount.
Yeah.
That were all bigger than the 3 deer I have on my wall because of either camera light or pre-roll footage or, you know, natural causes, you know, dogs running deer through the woods or whatever. But I mean, you name it. I've had all these different situations that have put me in the stand where I'm at, you know, 2 years ago, thinking, why is this not happening for me? Why is it that I'm not hunting over corn, but I'm watching all of these deer from a long ways away, and it's like I'm sitting in there thinking it's night to night, and I was tired of that. I was sick and tired of that. It was like, okay, it's time to do some research, listen to podcasts while I'm working, you know, do some research when I get home, try to figure out why is that the case? Why am I not able to seal the deal?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that's kind of where that reset button was, you know, I was literally sick and tired of watching giants from afar.
Right.
You know?
I mean, you know, going back to what you were saying earlier, like, look, you know, if people, you know, want to hunt over corn, as you said, it's like more power to them, man. If that's the way you like to hunt, like I don't begrudge anyone to hunt with a weapon,
not at all.
Yeah, a legal weapon or a legal, you know, method of take or whatever the case is. Like, yeah, I'm all for it. It just doesn't. It just doesn't. Yeah, as long as it's legal, it's like it just doesn't appeal to me. Like, there's a property that I had hunted like the past 2 years that was part of like a conservancy, which is part of really like the, you know, the suburb area that I live in. It was part of like a doe management kind of group or whatever unit, right? And they would allow so many guys, and they would give you each like a parcel to hunt somewhere. And in those places, like, you were 100% allowed to run bait, feeders, mineral stations, whatever, and hunt over them if you wanted to. I never did for a multitude of reasons. One, I just didn't think it was going to work. Two, I just didn't want to lug extra stuff into the timber. You know what I mean? It was like, I prefer to do it without, but I know there are plenty of guys.
Not to mention the money.
Yeah. And plenty of guys in that group, you know, like to hunt that way. And that's fine. But like, to me, it's always been about the process. And like, I think my next question, I'm going to get to it here in a second, but it's like, for me, it was always, once I had my reset and kind of did a self-evaluation of like what was important to me, and like ultimately it's like, what do I want to get out of this? Like, what am I in this for? Like, I'm in it for a multitude of reasons, right? But like the hunt part of it, what am I in it for? And that, what I realized was the process and the challenge. Like, it was the idea of trying to strategically either manipulate a situation or strategically put myself in a position to where I'm going to have an opportunity that I'm only using, you know, what God gave both the deer and I, for lack of a better way to put it. You know what I mean? And
it's that like primal, it's that, just like that primal feeling.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And that for me was like, whenever the light kind of switched for me and was like, all right, this is the approach that I need to, this is the thing, these are the things I need to kind of investigate to try to get to the next level to be able to be a predator. Cause that's kind of how I viewed it.
Yeah.
I needed to go from like hunting, you know, as a, like, I like to bow hunt, to I'm now a predator when I walk into the woods. I'm like a coyote. I'm like a wolf. I'm going to hunt for opportunity. I'm going to hunt down what I want to kill. And I'm going to try to make it happen. So I'm curious for you, you know, what was that appeal to change the way you were hunting? Like, I know you were mentioning, like, you were watching these bucks and you were just kind of like outside
It was
the,
frustration.
yeah,
Yeah.
the range of
I
killing.
mean, it was mostly out of frustration.
Yeah.
You know, I literally, Clint, I had my blinders on for so long, just focused on everything that these other guys were telling me to do. And it wasn't working for me,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And then it literally got to the point where it's like, okay, I mean, even from my entries and my exits, I mean, I was screwing up everything. I mean, everything. And I had no clue.
Right.
I had no idea why, you know, I'm getting pictures of this, you know, of this Boone and Crockett class whitetail 3 nights in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm in there and he's not there. I literally could not see through the fog.
Right. So what
until I listened to your podcast.
Right. So I was going to ask you, so what information was it that started to kind of like click for you when you were like, oh, this is what's happening, or this is where I messed this up? Like, what were the couple, like, you know, like key moments where you're like, man, this is definitely where I'm screwing this up?
Honestly, it's really hard to say, like, seriously, there's so many. and I say that as a humble man, you know, it's like I'm standing here with my pants down. I mean, I will flat out admit I have screwed up for years and years. And I mean, just by the grace of God, your podcast came across my YouTube channel. And one that I could kind of, not specifically tell you about, was, you know, John Eberhart,
mm-hmm.
A podcast that you did with him. And he was talking about a hunt. I think it was in Ohio, where he showed up and hunted this farm that other guys kept getting busted on, and they couldn't get it done. He walked in there, and I think within a matter of a day or two, he had a giant on the ground.
Yep.
And he was talking about his approach, you know, to the stand, or to the tree he wanted to be in. I guess I don't mean to insult John. He's not a stand hunter.
Right.
But to the tree he's trying to be in, and, you know, his approach and how he did it, knowing where the deer would be bedded, and not only that, but which direction they would be facing, you know, because of the wind. I mean, it all just kind of made sense. And I was able to relate that to many properties that I hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, from multiple other guests that you've had on your show. And, yeah, I mean, I can't really think off the top of my head specific examples, but I do know that John Eberhart's hunt, I believe it was in Ohio, where he walked down. I think he went in the middle of the field instead of along the tree line. You remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I remember the exact hunt that you're talking about. There was I think it was even late season that he did it, because they really didn't think he was going to be able to get it done. I think it was even after shotgun season. And he asked them,
it was snowing.
And so what it basically was they were all entering through the timber, and they were trying to hunt these evening hunts along this field edge where these deer were coming out, and the deer was never coming out. And what he realized was, well, they're coming in through the timber. They're walking through all the best bedding, alerting everything in the world that, you know, they're coming through there. And so he ended up coming through, and John doesn't care about the wind. That's like the one difference, I think. One place where I differ from him in terms of, like, I've learned a lot from John, and I've taken a lot from the way John hunts, but that's the one thing where I do differ, is like, I do play the wind, where John, you know, believes in his scent lock and won't worry so much about the wind, but he was accessing through the field because the deer aren't going to be in the field that time of day. And so he was accessing through the field to his tree, knowing that now he hasn't blown anything out. Everything now has the opportunity to filter out the way it should. And it did. And he ended up putting the slob on the ground. And it was just, you know, and I think it's interesting whenever you say it's not any one thing, because I think that's really important for people to kind of like think about and remember whenever they listen to, you know, guys talk about hunts, whether you're listening to John or, you know, or you're listening to Enfald or Adam Hayes or, you know, to Quistos or whoever it is, like, they're giving you like principles and ideas that they've used and that they've seen work. And then as the listener,
I mean, that's literally what I've done as a listener.
Yeah.
As a consumer of content, is I've taken little nuggets from all of those guys that you just mentioned.
That's just it. And
I've created my own way.
Yeah. And you have to look at it based on like the properties you're hunting and how that might adapt, because a lot of times like the underlying principles that they're explaining are foundational and rock solid, but they're telling you a story and how they've used it that is very specific to like how they hunted that specific hunt.
Situational.
Yes.
Right.
And what they're not intending you to do is say, I'm going to go out and try it exactly like this. What they're really saying to you is these are the things that I thought about. This was the ultimate plan that I came up with to use that strategy. You need to kind of think about those principles and think of it in context to your hunt, what the wind is going to do, what the terrain is, what your access is, and then use that principle to figure out if that is actually going to work for that particular situation, right? Because it's not a one size fits all. And I think that's where a lot of people fall into a trap, because they'll be like, well, I tried a bump and dump, and it didn't work. And it's like, well, was the deer ever going to come back to that bed, right? Did you bump him, off of his bed in the evening and have the same wind for the morning and come back and hunt that and have the right wind to hunt that same spot? Like, so
I think another big part of that is was that the third time that deer's been bumped this week.
Right. Yeah.
Because he's not necessarily the only hunter on that property. And that's another kind of thing that, talking about, getting to, the deer that I killed last year and my hunt from last year, that's a big part of it, man.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be the best deer hunter in the world, but if everybody else around you is screwing it up, I mean, I've kind of learned that firsthand. I mean, not that I'm the best deer hunter in the world. I don't mean it like that, but what I mean is when I'm trying to do everything right, and I'm doing my absolute best to do everything by every example that I've learned from. I mean, it doesn't matter much when you're hunting a 15-acre property and it's surrounded by guys that are out there, smoking cigarettes and walking through the woods.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely becomes 3D chess to a degree when you start to add, that in, with, pressure and stuff like that, and where other guys are going to be.
It depends on your situation.
Yeah. Because then at that point, you kind of have to start, hunting, not only hunting the deer, but hunting the people at the same time, and that's the one thing on this new piece that I think I mentioned it in passing in like an earlier podcast, but I found a really sizable deer for PA on this one particular piece. And I've kind of figured out where he's at. And, when I've done my scouting through these particular areas, like I have found a little bit of human sign here and there, not particularly where I need to be to try to kill this deer. But close enough, you know what I mean? But the good news is that, a lot of these, this sign, or if I find a stand or whatever, it's like they're all lock-ons, or ladders, and they're not moving. You know what I mean? So I know precisely where those people are going to be. And so it's like you almost have to start hunting like the pressure. So you have to think about, well, how's that guy going to access? If we happen to hunt the same day, right, and I'm 200 yards from him, like what's the most logical way for him to come in? And what's that going to do to potential deer movement?
I don't know about you, but that was an evolution for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, even when I would acquire a new property, I would see an old stand, and I'm like, oh, well, this must be a good spot. I would set up there.
Right.
I mean, I've literally been in a situation, and a friend of mine, if he hears this, he's going to laugh. But, I mean, we went out, we set up this property, and another guy set up his stand not even 5 feet from ours. Not even 5 feet after we had done it. We were in set. He had permission to hunt the property as well, but it until you understand all of these things that all of your guests and you have been talking about with the platform that you've created in your podcast, until people hear how it really works, I think it has to be something that you evolve into, because I mean, I was the opposite of what you just explained. I was the opposite of that.
Yeah. Well,
I would go to like, oh, well, there's 3 stands here. This must be a good pinch point.
Right.
And I would hang in there and be like, why am I not killing?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think everyone, at some point, goes through that evolution at different
Right.
times, right? And it's like, look, I'm certainly not the first guy to talk about it. There's plenty of folks out there that have been doing that a lot longer than me. See, Dan Enfold or any guys that have been hunting, public or pressured property. Even, I mean, private property in Pennsylvania is pressured. Like the family farms I grew up hunting. I mean, you were hunting other hunters at the same time, no matter what parcel you had, because no one had much more than 100 to maybe 200 acre piece, and everyone and their brother hunted. And most of the time, other family members were hunting that property with you, and so
Right.
you were constantly dealing with, with pressure. But I think that's the one thing I think we're all guilty of, kind of like doing that. Cause I know me kind of early on, I would use like finding those like those stands as like, almost like markers, right? Because they oftentimes were in pretty obvious places, right? And I kind of always refer to those as like your primary like terrain or habitat features, right? It's like those are the most obvious
Right.
places on the map. So it's like if you're in like the big woods or something like that, where you've got a lot of terrain, a lot of topo, elevation changes, it's like, man, as any easy to get to, any easy to access saddle, I can promise you there's going to be a scrape in it, and I can promise you there's going to be someone hunting. Because it's easy to get
Right.
to, and it's a really
Right.
obvious terrain feature that's going to pinch deer and it's going to funnel deer. What caliber, I don't know, but if you hang a camera there, you're going to
Right.
get inventory and you'll see deer. And so
But see,
then,
until I consumed, the content that you put out there, I wouldn't realize that scrape that's going to be in that saddle, it's good fresh sign, but it's only happening at night.
it's only, yeah, exactly. And so yeah, and it's all, it becomes about contextualizing what you're seeing, right? And
Right.
understanding what it's telling you, because it's all valuable, but it all has
Right.
different value. You know what I mean? Just like every dollar you have in your pocket, every paper bill you have in your pocket has value, but they all have different value. It's the same thing
Right.
with sign, based on where it's laid down, the time of year it's laid down, what potential terrain feature or habitat it's being laid in, and things like that all kind of give it a different score, if you will. And
Right.
that's, understanding like, the ease of access and things like that. It's like that all just comes with making the mistakes, you know what I mean? And setting up at the wrong spot and having a guy walk in on you because you're really close to an obvious area or whatever. It's happened to me plenty of times. It still happens to me, like I'll find a spot where I'm like, man, this is too obvious. Like outthink myself, right? I'm like, this is too
Right.
obvious. Like people will overlook this because it's too close. You know what I mean? Um,
Right.
but yeah, man, but let's jump into the story about the deer you killed last year, man. Cause so he was a hammer. And I just kind of want you to walk me through the hunt, like, when it started. Did you know about him for a few years? Just kind of walk me through it from like soup to nuts.
Well, I guess the best place to start is this is the first year I've ever hunted this property.
Mm-hmm.
It was a brand new property. My wife is actually phenomenal at acquiring hunting properties.
Great partner to
Um,
have.
Yeah, I mean, her and I work extremely well together. But she's she does a lot of customer relations with her job, and hey, she's very good on the phone, and she knocks them down.
Mm-hmm.
So this property we actually had the year prior, but we never messed with it because the landowner said we had to earn our keep.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't a matter of not wanting to, it was a matter of we didn't have the time to.
Right.
So last year, she's like, hey, do you want to go and check this property out? I'm like, sure. Lo and behold, I actually had hunted close to that property in the past. So I knew the caliber of genetics and deer that were in the area. And I was like, heck yeah, let's go. We ended up, I think, in the hottest day of July, year before last, or no, last year. We probably moved 30 tons of cow manure with the old traditional pitchforks.
Right.
I mean, it took us all day, and we finally got to the permission slip signing part, and I was like, oh, that sucked. But
Right.
now we're in the good time.
Right.
So, I mean, we get our permission slip signed, and, I was like, hey, we'll be out here, blah, blah, blah. And, it turned into, do you want a nuisance permit? And I have like 7 other guys that hunt here. And I just looked at her, and I mean, I was devastated. I'm
Right.
like, I just busted my butt
Right.
for an overhunted property that we're not going to do any good on. This is going to suck.
Right.
But, a couple of days in the dozer and listening to podcasts about hunting high pressure whitetails. I was like, all right, let's do this.
Yep.
So basically this property it's long and deep, but it's not very wide. I mean, I would say it's 140 acres, or 100. I think it's like 120 acres. But north to south, it's only probably 600 yards wide. So it's deep. And so I went out, her and I went out. We put some cameras up on main travel routes north to south. It's kind of covered, anywhere that they may cruise through, and looked around, found a bunch of stands. And instead of focusing all my efforts, to beat these guys and kill them before the deer got on top of them, I went to the furthest point away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, listening to Dan Infalt talking about hunting public land. I mean, that's what drove me to make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to know that, because I never would have thought that.
Right.
But I literally found the furthest point away, and we went in and we hung a permanent set. Well, a couple weeks later, I couldn't really afford to sell cams or anything like that. So we had some older, SD card cameras out there. And a couple weeks later, went out just real quick. I think it was raining. I was like, I want to slip in, pull these cards, slip out. And I mean, I think in one picture we had 4 shooters.
Nice.
And I was like, all right, game's on. Like, we need to figure this out. And this is in July. Mm-hmm. So, they're grown pretty good as far as the racks, but you can't really tell exactly what they're going to be. Well, as the months progressed, I learned to stay out, keep the pressure off. And I learned that, my access point was, it was definitely the wrong way to go.
Right.
So basically we had 2 permanent sets hung, and I kept getting these pictures, and then now it's like, all right, I'm jazzed. I'm ready to go. Start dumping money into cellular cams, and set them up and just replacing these cameras from north to south. Well, lo and behold, right before the season had started, he's the deer that I killed, I should say. Mm-hmm. He's been off of the property to the north, and I'm like, there's no way we're going to kill him. By the time he makes it across this, 80-acre field in daylight, it'll be too dark by the time he makes it to my permanent stand. There's no way I'm going to kill that deer.
Right.
So I kept telling my wife, like, don't get your hopes up, because we have other pressure to deal with, and he's not bedded on the property. He's not bedded, where we can, get in close and kill him in daylight. Well, I didn't really realize at that time that these mature bucks, they don't bed in the same place all year long.
Right.
I never really put that together until I listened to Dan Infalt talking about it. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, well, we have a bunch of does on the south side of the property. That's the furthest away from everyone else, but it's also the furthest away from where he's bedded now. So I'm going to see if, closer to November, or, at the beginning of November, if he transitions like these other guys are talking about. Mm-hmm. Well, next thing you know, on these cellular cameras, I'm watching this deer go from, bedding off of the property, hitting my camera the furthest to the north, just after dark mm-hmm. in the evenings, to now I'm not seeing him in the north, but I'm seeing him on the south side of the property.
Yep.
And that's when it kind of like light bulb moment. I'm literally in my dozer listening to your podcast and listening to him talking about, buck bedding and trying to figure out where these deer bed. And I'm like, whoa, like he has transitioned to his rut bed.
Right.
That's exactly what's going on. So now I'm dealing with, basically 40 acres of crazy thick bedding. I'm like, I have no idea where to even attack this, because the permanent set that I hung is what I've been setting up for the last 15 years. It's an observation stand, and I never realized that.
Right.
I've been hunting observation stands, over corn piles for years, wondering why, I'm watching all these big bucks from afar.
Right.
So I'm like, all right, well, I gotta figure something out here. And lo and behold, I listened to Mr. Infault himself talk about a mature buck. The property, I should say, it drops off pretty hard at the very back, downhill. And I'm listening to Dan say that the mature buck is going to bed on the top third of the hill, and when it's not extreme terrain.
Right.
And I'm like, well, here goes nothing. Here it is. We've watched this deer on trail camera. We've hunted the property one time on the north side. Never hunted the south side at all. Stayed out until, well, what I thought initially was until I would see him on camera. But what it turned out to be was until I stopped seeing him on camera. That's when I kind of used that, as kind of looking at it as a different way. I used that to realize that this deer is he's not in front of my cameras because he's over here.
Right.
Right. So, listening to Dan and where he, would say you could almost bet money that a deer's going to bed on the top third of this hill. I'm like, all right, like if that's where he's bedded, I know where I can hang a stand, where I can slip in. From the south, way out and around. I walked probably a good, 3/4 of a mile out of my way. And where he could not smell me, he could not hear me. The only thing that would be even remotely possible is if he could see me.
Right.
So I'm like, let's go for it. I have no idea whether this deer's going to be bedded here, but if these guys that have killed multiple buck deer or mature deer, and I mean, these guys definitely seem like they know what they're talking about. They're podcasting and I'm not. I'm going to go for it.
Right.
I'm going for it. Let's see if this works. So it just so happened to be, it was a Thursday, being a heavy equipment operator, it's pretty weather dependent. And it was just pouring down rain. So it shut me down for the day for work. Well, a good friend of mine, Scott, he's been my best friend since, we were little kids. He was off work as well because of the same thing. And I'm like, hey, man, I'm thinking about going out and hanging this set because I think I'm out of the game and I want to be in the game and I want to try this. Because if this dude is bedded where I think he is, based on what I'm hearing, I want to at least try it, see what happens. So he went out with me. We picked a tree. He picked the tree actually, and we hung this set in just a monsoon of a downpour. And I'm like, all right, we got out of there. Everything's good. Scent's all washed away. Hopefully he didn't see us. We should be good to go. I mean, the wind was blowing. It was the perfect way to go in and hang, a set like that.
Right.
So we get out of there and, we go to Taco Bell and we're eating lunch. And I'm like, dude, I either just completely ruined any chances I have at killing this deer or he's going to die tomorrow night.
Right.
And he's like, all right. Well, the next day came and I was like, if I'm going to hunt with as much rain as we've had, there's no way I'm going to work. I'm going to be in there at like 3:00. And I'm going to go so slow. I don't care if it takes me until 5:00. He's not going to move until that last 15 minutes anyway. I got to be able to get in there slow and quiet. Lo and behold, I had to work and I was crushed. I mean, I was almost burying my dozer. I mean, it was the most brutal conditions I've ever worked in. And the whole time, steam blowing out of my ears because I'm not doing what my plan was.
Right.
Well, the next, that night was a Friday and I got my kids. So, I'm boo-hooing and crying to the wife and she's like, just go out tomorrow and, all this and that. And I'm like, no, I'm going to stay home. Well, she finally just was like, go. You either go or I'm going. All right, I'm going. So I went out there, man, and Clint, it was picture perfect. I slipped in the stand. It was still pretty wet, quiet. I got up in there, and 15 minutes later, a small spike or forkhorn bumped a doe up that hill. And as I'm watching them going up the hill, I seen the deer that I killed stand up at 80 yards. It was to a T, exactly how Dan Infalt explained it.
Right.
And I'm telling you, I mean, at that point, it didn't matter to me whether I killed that deer or not.
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't think I would, because this forkhorn just bumped a doe right through there. This is November 2nd. Well, I mean, he's just, to explain the hunt a little more, he was pissed. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was the most aggressive deer I have ever seen. I mean, he wouldn't walk by anything without thrashing it.
Yeah. Nice.
I mean, he was like, "This is my turf. Get out of here." And he ended up staying up. He thrashed some trees and grunted a few times, and ended up going up towards where the forkhorn pushed that doe. I was like, "Well, that was it," but it worked. I've never gone after where I thought and I was confident where a big buck could bed. And then actually went in and verified it. It worked. It was perfect. Well, at this point, I'm thinking, I either have, as aggressive as he is, I have to let him know that I'm down here, or at least another buck is down here.
Right.
And maybe that'll be my chance. And as he's walking up that hill, I grunted. He stopped, looked back at me, or my direction, like, "All right, I'll take care of you in a minute." And I mean, he was out of sight. Probably 5 minutes later, I text my wife, I just seen him. She texted me a picture of a trail camera picked her up on the top of the hill. And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. Like, I'm not looking at it because I'm trying to be engaged in my hunt." But I'm like, "Yeah, like, I just seen him. He was just 80 yards from me." And I mean, it wasn't but 10 minutes later. Here he comes. Down the hill, thrashing everything he walked by, super aggressive. I mean, bristled up, just like, "All right, who's down here? Like, who am I going to take care of next?" kind of thing. And he came down the hill. I knew he was going to go left or right. He went left, walked right in front of me. I plucked him at 17 yards.
Nice.
And, it's my biggest buck to date.
Nice.
But, just the biggest takeaways with that is just listen to these people that have years and years of experience above and beyond anything that someone like me has, and trusting that they're telling the truth. It is definitely situational, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
But there's truth behind it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't encourage people enough to listen to, the Dan Infalt, John Eberhart, all the great guests that you've had on your show. These guys are legit.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just because of this one situation where I proved it, because I can relate it to all of the hunts that went bad.
Right. Yeah.
That's
probably probably more proof positive. It's like when you think back to like where mistakes were made, and you think about things that you've learned since, it's like it becomes really clear like where you made the mistakes. At least it has for me when I think back on previous hunts when I've screwed up. It's like I can usually point pretty quickly to like, okay, this is what's happened, and it doesn't always have to end with an arrow being released. And I think that's the part that people kind of get hung up on. It's like, I've said this several different times with, some of the hunts I had last year where I had a couple deer that I was kind of targeting on a couple pieces of public that were near me. And I actually had encounters with both of them, and both of them were probably, 3.5-year-old Pope and young deer, and for this area in Pennsylvania, like that's a really good deer. Like you probably wouldn't pass that up, and sometimes in this area, that's a good season for the fact that I had a close encounter with both. Like that, but I had them both in bow range. One, just it busted me, and the other one, I got dark deered over a set of primary scrapes. You know what I mean? And it was one of those things where I needed about 3 more minutes of daylight. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I had him at whatever it was, 15 yards or whatever. And that's the thing. It's like, it doesn't always have to end in an arrow released. It's like, these are successes to build on. Yeah. It's like, I still figured him out, You know what I mean?
You
It's just,
absolutely want.
yeah. So, and I think the other important thing is too is, you know, like we've talked about a couple different guys that you've learned from, and I've learned from those guys too. And I think it's really important, like we've talked about, that you just kind of pluck pieces that work for you. You know what I mean? Because there's definitely
Sure.
pieces that I kind of take from, you know, different, you know, I've had the, you know, um, I guess privilege of having some of these like guys come on, and some of them I've been able to, you know, create personal relationships with and stuff like that, to where I can kind of tap them for info and stuff like that, and just talk to them as a deer
Right.
hunter, like not on a podcast necessarily, you know. And
Yeah.
you know, and it's just the information they have is invaluable. And then like when you go out and you apply it, you know, it's like you kind of start to figure out which pieces for you make a lot of sense. You know what I mean? It's like,
Well, I mean, if I would have been in the right frame of mind to actually hear it 10 years ago, I mean, Clint, I'm not going to guarantee you anything, but I'm pretty confident in saying I would have quite a big difference on my wall.
right. Yeah.
I mean, seriously, man.
Yep.
And that's why I'm so thankful. And that's why I wanted to put myself out here and just explain my story. I mean, I literally have said that story of my actual hunt over in my head like 30 times to try to condense it, because I want, again, kind of how I'm wired, like I want to break down and tell you every aspect of everything, but we don't have enough time for that.
Right. we can sit here all day and talk deer hunting and still never cover all
like
of it.
The shortest version I can possibly give, you know,
Right.
about that. But seriously, I took a chance based on the professionals that you have you know have brought on your show.
All right, well,
And I applied that in my situation, in my way, and it worked.
yeah.
It absolutely worked. And I'm beyond grateful, because, I mean, again, I never would have been in the right frame of mind until my reset. But after my reset, this is how I'm going to hunt for the rest of my life. I'm definitely going to adapt, and I'm going to change.
Yeah.
You know, and hopefully for the better. I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but it has completely changed my mindset, my outlook, and just how I'm going to approach each fall. And I mean, hey man, proof's in the pudding.
Yeah.
You know, it's my first year really applying that. So, hey, you know, if I knock down a slammer this year, you know, maybe we'll have to talk about it again. But,
heck yeah, man. I'm down for that. I think the other cool thing that it does too, man, is like once you see, you know, it work or pay off, and like even if you didn't arrow that deer and you saw him get up out of his bed at 80 yards away, right? It's like that is confirmation that like you played the game correctly, right? Because I mean, dude, getting within 80 yards of a bedded deer, like that's about as far as in a lot of cases, that's about as close as you want to push it. You know, some guys will push it a little closer. I know I've heard like, you know, Dan might get into like 70, maybe 60, depending on the right conditions, but that's about as far as he might want to push it. And the only reason I can recall that is because we just did a whole series with him where we talked about that. And that was a specific question. It was just how aggressive do you get, you know, on beds or whatever. And, you know, for me, I'm probably not quite that slick. Like I've got this one spot right now where I have a pretty good deer that I know where he's probably going to be bedded, you know, especially the early part of the year, because my season comes in mid-September. So it's like I still have him on that bed to food most likely before he probably transitions. I might have a week, maybe 2 weeks to get that done. And I was actually just looking at maps like before you and I jumped on here to do this, because I was trying to figure out exactly what my access was going to be. And I started going and looking at like, well, what's the weather data when I glassed him? What was the wind doing when I glassed him? What was the wind doing when I bumped him out of his bed the other day? Like, you know, because that's the confidence that like when you start to see this stuff pay off, that it gives you, is just like, I knew where that deer was at after I glassed him. I knew where he was, and I just needed to go in and validate it and find it. And that was one of the evolutions for me, was that I've just become way more aggressive because of the land that I hunt. It's like, I can't wait for something. I can't play it safe. It's like, if I think I know where a deer is at, I got to go in and try to kill it, because the pressure around it and stuff like that's going to move him to where he's not going to be doing the things what I think he might be doing 3 weeks from now or 4 weeks from now as pressure builds. And so that was my adaptation. It's like, I played it too safe for a long time, you know? And so now it's just about being more and more more and more aggressive, which you just kind of learn these things as you go, man. And like, I'm just super pumped and, to be able to even just be a small part of that story, man. It's like the credit all to you for putting in the work and stuff like that. It makes me, it humbles me to think that, that you might think that I helped play a small part in that. And that's really what this whole thing that I'm doing here is really to do. It's like, if I help one person do what you did, then I've done what I intended to do. So thank you.
Well, hey, no, really, I'm the one with the gratitude here because, again, man, I'm not trying to toot your horn or anything like that. I'm being serious. I literally used this property that I knew there was great deer. I knew there was great deer on the property. I mean, both in prior history as well as,
inventory. Yeah.
Inventory and trail camera photos. I knew there was good deer, but I was so engrossed in trying to figure out where a buck beds and trying to get in close enough to kill him and kill that way, opposed to overbait or, any other way like that, that I literally used this as an experiment.
Yeah.
And it's still my plan, but every aspect of my plan was derived from the guests that you've had on your show. So not only thank you, Clint, but I want to say seriously from the bottom of my heart, I mean, I am so thankful from the guests that you've had on your show to invest their time and share their knowledge. It's huge to the average people like me. Yeah. It's huge.
No, for sure, man.
I really hope that someone hears my story and is like, whoa, hey, I need to go back and listen to some podcasts because, I mean, there's some really good information. And I'm just, like I said, I'm thankful. I used it as an experiment. It worked. And guess what I'm going to do this year? I'm going to use it. And I have had my absolute tail kicked.
Yeah.
I mean, where I'm at, I could drive a half an hour and you could close your eyes and open them and think you were in the Adirondacks.
Right.
I mean, I can drive a half an hour the other way and you're in flat farm country.
Yep.
But, I have had my absolute butt kicked for the last couple of years hunting hill country. And that's what I'm super pumped about this year. I have a deer on trail camera right now. I mean, he's very camera shy, so any picture I get of him, he's in the far background. I know he's still there. He has no reason to leave. But I mean, I've literally gotten my butt kicked on thermals, not understanding that hunting flat country all my life, or the last 15 years, never understood thermals. And I've been getting my butt handed to me the last couple of years with this deer. And, this is going to be definite, he's at least 6 years old. Who cares about his score, but he's nothing to,
he's nothing to sneeze at. Yeah, that's for sure, man.
He's a pretty impressive specimen.
Yeah.
But I'm going to apply that. I'm going to apply these same things.
That's what it's all about.
To hunting hill country.
That's what it's all about, man. It's just building on top of success, man. You just keep kind of layering those things on it. And I just want to reiterate what you said just a couple minutes ago with, thankful for the time that some of these guys give. And I know Dan does a ton of podcasts, man. Like, and everyone always wants a piece of his time and stuff like that. And these guys are just so generous with their time, and willing to come on and share. And there was a time, a day and age where, guys might be a little resistant to sharing information or want to keep it to themselves and stuff like that. And, these guys that are just a wealth of knowledge that are willing to just kind of give up their secrets or whatever, it's, I forget who it is that, I think it's Gary Vaynerchuk. Not to get off on like a tangent of like something completely different, but Gary Vaynerchuk is one of those guys who, like, I don't know if you know who he is, but he's kind of like a media mogul. And he's like one of the probably one of the brightest like digital media guys that are out there. He's built an empire for himself. Incredibly smart guy, super driven.
Loves his baseball cards.
Yeah, he does. Shoes, whatever else he can flip, he loves. But his whole motto is he just gives away his secrets for free. And doesn't care about it creating competition, because what he recognizes is that there is only about 1% of people that will ever be willing to do the work to actually capitalize on the information he's giving them. You know what I mean? And a lot of it's the same
Right.
way in the whitetail woods. You know what I mean? It's like it's not easy. It's hard. You know what I mean? It
Well, it's like,
truthfully is challenging.
Are you listening to these podcasts for background noise while you're doing something else?
Right.
Or are you really, sitting here, trying to break down everything that they're saying, maybe rewinding and then re-listening in order to, help better your situation? I mean, that's the approach I took.
Yep.
Was trying to better myself by it.
Yeah.
And, again, time tells all stories.
Yep.
I could go the next 7 years and not have any luck at all.
Yeah.
But,
well, I highly doubt that, man. You're motivated. You're breaking things down the right way. You're pulling in all the information, and you're hungry to learn the next thing, man, and apply it. And that's really what it takes, man. It's like anything in life, man. If you don't love the process of what you're doing, expect limited success. If you're in love with the process, sky's the limit. And that's kind of, with anything. But, at this point, man, we've been jamming for a little over an hour, man. I want to be sensitive to your time, but I know before I let you go, I know there was something else you wanted to add before we got off here. So I want to turn it over to you to do that.
It's a challenge. Everybody out there, if you're listening to this, I want to challenge you. I want you to try to hit the reset button just one time. This coming fall, go to the woods. Do not look at your phone. Take your phone maybe for safety reasons or whatever, right, Clint?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But don't look at it. Leave it in your pocket. That's my challenge to everybody out there. Take that one time. I don't care if it's the first hunt of the year or the last. Try to do that just one time. For me, I guess, whatever. But go to the woods, enjoy what God has given you just one time.
Yeah.
Do not mess with the social media. Don't mess with your phone. Just hunt, be yourself with nature and enjoy yourself. Hit that reset button and try to look at life, look at your hunt, look at your situation that you're, the property that you're hunting or where the deer may be in a different way, and just try to hit that reset button. That's it, man.
That's awesome, man. I think that's a great place to end. I will accept your challenge, my friend, and I look forward to hitting my reset, brother. I appreciate you coming on, man. I know you and I are going to stay in touch. Good luck to you this season, and let's do it again whenever you have this. When you catch up to this next one in Hill Country.
Yeah. Hey, and real quick, it's crazy times out there right now. I think if everybody could just remember, love God, love your neighbor, the world will be a much better place. Thanks, Clint.
You bet, man. Thank you. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. If you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Maven Optics. And until next time, we'll see y'all.